The most terrifying problems in life are the problems that seem to have no solution. Tell a man that an asteroid the size of Texas is about to annihilate all life on Earth, but that we might be able to stop it if we can shuttle an oil drilling team to the asteroid to plant a nuke inside it, and the most ardent pessimist will calmly wait for Bruce Willis to save him. Because there's hope. Tell a man that his football team has been eliminated from playoff contention and depression sets in because there's no hope. Hopeless situations are to our psychological well-being what Chris Farley was to tables.
Here's you, here's Matt, there's you, there.
Let's take the problem of prison radicalization as an example. Around 1,500 European Muslims who traveled to the Middle East to join ISIS eventually returned to Europe. Many of these jihadis are now in prison, but will be released in 3 to 5 years on average. Government officials are scrambling to figure out what to do when these known ISIS supporters are released. But what about their time in prison? What are these ISIS supporters doing while they're incarcerated, surrounded by hundreds of disillusioned youths who are cut off from their friends and family members? Do you think they might be, I don't know, spreading an ideology that calls for the violent subjugation of you and your children? And the problem didn't start with jihadis returning from the Middle East. Consider someone like Anjem Choudary. In 2016, Anjem was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for supporting the Islamic State. He didn't carry out a terrorist attack. He didn't kill anyone. He simply invited his followers to support a terrorist organization. So he was promoting a terrorist group. How did the British government deal with Anjem? They sent him to prison. Pop quiz. What was Anjem Choudary doing in prison? Was he A, playing cards and exercising, B, learning a new trade, such as carpentry or welding, C, pondering the error of his ways, or D, recruiting the next generation of terrorists? Do you see the problem? Western governments keep locking up Muslims for supporting terrorist organizations or for grooming and raping little girls or for any number of other crimes. These men, and sometimes women, are sentenced to prison. But what are they really sentenced to? Prison dawah. They spend their time in prison convincing depressed, gullible youths to convert to Islam. And once these depressed, gullible youths convert, they are radicalized. Jihadis are using Western prison systems to build an army. And Western governments have absolutely no clue what to do about it. So, how do you stop prison radicalization? In theory, isolation would help. You could, in theory, keep all potential radicalizers isolated from the rest of the prison population. Unfortunately, there are so many Muslims in European prisons that this option is financially impractical. Western nations would have to bankrupt themselves, paying to keep all of these inmates isolated from everyone else. And governments bankrupting themselves to guard against jihad would only help the jihad. In other words, jihadis forcing governments to waste their resources and weaken their infrastructures is itself a form of jihad. So, how do you stop prison radicalization without destroying your own nation? I know from experience that some moron in the comments section is already typing, "I can solve the problem right now! Just kill them all! Yee-haw!" Let me respond to this guy for a moment. Dear kill 'em all guy, how is your kill 'em all solution stupid? Let me count the ways. First, most of the Muslims who are incarcerated in the West haven't been convicted of any sort of capital crime. So what you're really saying is that Western governments should kill people for way more things than they're currently killing people for. Robbery, death penalty. Assault, death penalty. Sexual assault, death penalty. We know you traveled to the Middle East and that it had something to do with ISIS, but sadly we can't prove very much about it. Death penalty. Just keep in mind that the more things you want to kill people for, the more you start to sound like ISIS. I thought we were trying to preserve the West, not transform it into something far more violent. Second, if you're saying that your government should start killing people it regards as political or ideological threats, keep in mind that governments that do this never stop with the people you regard as a threat. They ultimately end up killing everyone who challenges their authority. In fact, it's only a matter of time before such a government regards you as a threat and kills you. And that's why it's in everyone's best interest to put serious limitations on the government's power to kill people. Third, if you really believe that slaughtering Muslims is the way forward, what color is the sky in your world if you think that Western governments are going to climb on board your crazy train? We've got jihadis on one side saying, kill the infidels, they're a threat to our way of life. And we've got you on the other side saying, kill the Muslims, they're a threat to our way of life. Perhaps you haven't noticed, but Western governments and the education system and the entertainment industry and the media are in love with all things Islamic. You, the guy typing "Nuke Mecca" in the comments section of YouTube, sound like a complete lunatic to them. So unless you've been secretly developing some awesome mind control device that can convince politicians and reporters to completely reverse their positions, you're delusional if you think that your comments section rants are going to become public policy. But maybe you're not counting on the government at all. Maybe you're counting on the nut job you see in the mirror every morning. Maybe you're already typing, I don't need anyone else. I'll just kill them all myself. Newsflash. Going on a killing spree yourself is even dumber than counting on the government to do it for you. What could you possibly hope to accomplish with your killing spree? Governments around the world are pushing for new laws that block hate speech against Islam. If you start killing Muslims, guess whose crime is going to be Exhibit A for every politician trying to protect Islam from criticism? Yours, genius. Nothing you could do in life would help the global jihad more than violently attacking Muslims. Beyond that, whatever idiotic ideology is rolling around in that head of yours, politicians and the media will lump your views together with people who condemn violence. Politicians and the media won't say, oh, there's some violent loser who attacked a bunch of Muslims, unlike most critics of Islam who condemn violence and criticize Islam peacefully. Instead, they'll say, see, this is what people who criticize Islam really want. Look at what they did with Anders Breivik. Anders Breivik is a neo-Nazi and an Odinist. Neo-Nazis are as far left as you can be on the political spectrum without falling off the edge, and Odinists are as pagan as you can be on the religious spectrum without sacrificing your daughter to Moloch. Breivik said that he realized from watching Islamic terrorist attacks that a terrorist attack was the only way to make people listen to him. So, radical leftist, as pagan as the Kaaba, and inspired by jihadis, that's Anders Breivik. How did the media portray him? Anders Breivik is a far-right Christian fundamentalist inspired by counter-jihadists like Robert Spencer. If the media portrayed Anders Breivik as the exact opposite of what he actually is in order to discredit people who are diametrically opposed to his beliefs and tactics, why in the name of fake news do you think you'll get your message across by going on a killing spree? The fact is, if you decide to go on a killing spree, your attack will only help jihadis because your attack, like Breivik's attack, will be used to silence future criticism of Islam. So, killing Muslims won't stop prison radicalization, it will accelerate prison radicalization. And the question I asked was not, how do you accelerate prison radicalization? The question was, for the last time, how do you stop prison radicalization? As someone who doesn't trust the Islamophilic circus performers who lead our countries, I have to take it as a given that we can't rely on our governments to stop prison radicalization. Our governments got us into this mess, and they're only going to make it worse. So we can't count on politicians to stop prison radicalization. We have to empower the inmates to do it. Why? Because inmates are far, far more trustworthy than politicians. But how do we empower inmates to deal with the threat of prison radicalization? The answer to this question shouldn't be too difficult. All we need to do is find something that's foundational to prison culture and the convict code, show that it's incompatible with Islam, draw attention to the incompatibility, and watch the pressure shift from conversion to deconversion. There's a pressure now to convert to Islam in prison. But if you can show inmates that Islam is, at its core, irreconcilable with their most cherished principles, there will be a pressure to leave Islam. The challenge here is figuring out what the incompatibility might be. To locate the incompatibility for us, we need a very specific kind of person with some very particular characteristics. One, in order to know which aspects of prison culture are at odds with Islam, we need someone who understands prison culture. Two, in order to know which teachings of Islam are incompatible with the convict code, we need someone who understands Islam's most trusted sources. Three, since the combined forces of all Western intelligence agencies haven't been able to solve this problem, we need someone who's a total genius. If only we could find someone who has spent years in prison and who has spent years studying Islam and whose IQ, if it were in degrees Celsius, would melt a diamond. If only we had someone like that. Fortunately, I happen to know the one person in the world who meets all of these criteria. In fact, I had lunch with him just the other day. We were having lunch and I said to him, David, his name's David too. I said, David, you spent years in prison and you understand Islam and you're a super genius. What can we do about prison radicalization before the jihadi army is mobilized against our wives and children? He looked at me with those piercing brown eyes and said, David, that's what he calls me. He said, David, it's simple really. There are certain teachings and practices in Islam that inmates just don't know about, but that, if inmates did know about them, would suffocate Islam in the prison system. I said, can you give me an example? He said, yes, I can. You see, the lowest forms of life in prison, the absolute bottom of the prison barrel, are snitches and child molesters. Inmates can put up with just about everything else, but when they learn that someone is a snitch or a child molester, they have nothing but contempt for the person. Murderers are safe, drug dealers are safe, thieves are safe, but snitches and child molesters have no rest in prison. Most of these inmates have kids. When they find out that someone is sexually attracted to kids, they are not happy. So all you have to do is make it common knowledge among inmates that Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, had sex with a prepubescent 9-year-old girl. If inmates learn that Muhammad had sex with a prepubescent girl, they are not going to convert to Islam. Converting to Islam would violate the very core of the convict code. In fact, they'll start using this information about Muhammad to criticize Islam. The pressure will be reversed. At this point, I interrupted my insanely intelligent and tastefully attired friend David and said, listen, that sounds good, but in Western society, no one wants to criticize Islam. So this plan will never work. David looked at me with his left eyebrow raised and said, David, inmates are not politically correct. They're not in prison for caring about people's feelings. They will not hesitate to call someone out for having sex with a prepubescent girl. All you have to do is get the facts about Muhammad into their hands and they'll do the rest. They'll do the work. And instead of the prison system serving as a breeding ground for jihad, it will become a breeding ground for the counter-jihad. People won't go to prison and convert. They'll go to prison and apostatize. I said, well, this is starting to make sense, but there's a problem. How are we going to get the Muslim sources into the hands of inmates? We can't send them massive multi-volume collections of Islamic texts. It seems impossible. David got a mischievous grin on his face as he pulled something out of his pocket and said, "I've already put the sources into a downloadable printable tract. If we can get viewers around the world to send this tract to inmates, the inmates will take it from there. They'll do the work. They'll confront the jihadis that are using the prison system to build an army." It's true, of course, that there are certain prisons that are so overrun with radical Muslims that it wouldn't be safe to discuss Muhammad and Aisha. But in most prisons, inmates will have no problem whatsoever spreading the facts around their cell blocks until the prison system is saturated with criticism of Muhammad. And this will eventually trickle even into the more radicalized prisons. So, anyone who's concerned about prison radicalization, anyone who wants a safer future and doesn't want to sit around doing nothing while jihadis radicalize the next generation, can start printing tracts at home, folding them up, putting them in envelopes, and sending them to inmates. If they have friends who are locked up, they've got some names. If they're in touch with prison ministries, they can get more names. They can get names from newspapers or from online inmate locators. And for the low price of a few postage stamps, they can equip some of the most non-PC men and women on the planet to sabotage the global jihad right in the heart of its primary Western stronghold. How's that for a monkey wrench? Needless to say, I found David's reasoning very persuasive. So, I've made his tract available for download. There's a link in the description box. If a few thousand or even a few hundred of you start printing copies and sending them to inmates in the jails and prisons in your areas, you will help put an end to prison radicalization in the most peaceful manner imaginable. Of course, this tract isn't just for inmates. You can print copies and hand them out to anyone. You can pass them out to students. You can hand them to your leftist and feminist friends and ask if they approve of Muhammad's relationship with a prepubescent girl. You can give them to Muslims who've never read their sources and have no clue what kind of things their prophet did. They even make excellent stocking stuffers for Christmas. And this tract contains only a small portion of the information the world needs but is currently blind to. There's plenty more where that came from. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you can get all the resources I'll be putting out in the coming weeks and months. In the comments section, tell me what facts you think the world needs to know about Islam, Muhammad, and the Quran.